Hello and welcome to Star USA Training. Today is Tuesday, July 26th, and we'll be talking about the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism, better known as CTPAT. We are recording this webinar. The slides, recording, and any other materials will be made available to all registrants after the broadcast. I highly recommend the Q&A feature on the webinar. If you have any questions, they will get answered throughout, and we will absolutely take more at the end. For anyone having difficulty with the automated closed captioning transcriptions, please contact us via training@startusa.org after the webinar, and we'd be more than happy to help. There are many initialisms and acronyms and in international trade. I do tend to speak fast, and this content can be generally quite difficult for transcription software to parse through. So our teams are more than happy to help you better understand the materials. Just let us know, and we'll do what we can to help out. And also, there is one CCS credit available. Please email train@startusa.org after the webinar with your ID number, and we'll get that processed for you. And without further ado, let's talk about CTPAT, the framework of the program, and its implementation requirements. Just some quick background on myself and Star USA. We are a trading compliance consulting, advice, training, and services firm out of Northeast Ohio. We specialize in outsourced operations, policies and procedures, audits and disclosures, service provider management and oversight, training in all areas of trade compliance, including HS, Origin, CTPAT, and many other areas. We're really quite skilled at taking your unique problems, your unique circumstances, and forming them into a plan of action that'll help your business move forward. Some background on myself. I have my customs broker's license, and I've been in the international trade business now for almost 20 years. During that time, I've worked with clients of pretty much every scope and size and across pretty much all industries. I have attended CTPAT validations in Europe, Asia, North, South, and Central America. Star USA is a CTPAT certified company, and we did have our own successful revalidation just last year. If you have any questions or want to know more about the business, please follow the links on the bottom right there. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the framework of what CTPAT is, how it came to be, how it operates within the international landscape, and what you need to pay attention to when considering joining the program or when working to implement it successfully in your own organization or for whatever your needs might be. First, some background on what's going on with international trade lately, just to stress the importance of supply chain security. In 2021, exports actually increased by 18.5% to $2.5 trillion. That's a typo there. This is the largest increase on record. In fact, the decrease during 2020 was the largest decrease on record, now coupled with the increase in 2021 being the largest increase on record. Imports moved up to $2.8 trillion, a 16% jump. This is back up to almost back up to pre-COVID levels. It's actually higher than the 2018 stats, but still below 2019, where there was $3.2 trillion in value being imported every year through US ports. There are more than 32.7 million cargo containers coming through the US ports in 2021. 32.7 million. That's a huge number, and CBP is responsible for ensuring the safety and security of that cargo moving into the country. And to help them do that, they have established a CTPAT program. There are now more than 11,000 CTPAT members, representing about 52% of all inbound cargo is covered by CTPAT, so a little bit over half. There's more info in the links at the bottom of the page there if you care to read up on the statistics of what's going on in international trade with the US. So supply chain security became a major focus following the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. CBP recognized that they did not have the resources to adequately secure the borders, and to do so, they needed the assistance and the participation of the trade community. And they developed the U.S. Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism program in late November 2001. CBP is responsible for enforcing more than 49 federal agency regulations at the borders. So they are the boots on the ground. They are the people that ensure that all of the other agencies' regulations are being enforced at those borders. This pivot in supply chain security moved their focus from revenue collection and revenue recognition over to security. And in fact, they actually moved customs into the Department of Homeland Security, the newly deformed DHS. And the supply chain security initiative, the mentality, has been pervasive ever since then and grown rapidly over the last 20 years. CBP recognized that it needs that support from the international trade community, and in the first year, they were able to gain more than 1,000 CTPAT members during its infancy. And again, now after 20 years, we have more than 11,000 members in the program. In the wake of 9/11 and in the wake of the CTPAT program's development, other nations started introducing their own security frameworks that fit into their already established federal compliance regimes. The authorized economic operator, the AEO program being the most prevalent one of those programs where historically it had a very, very strong compliance focus. It now developed into and added a security focus to the AEO initiatives. And CTPAT is all about achieving security through cooperation. It has those twin goals of security and cooperation. And those are extremely important aspects of the program and things that program members should recognize when working with CBP on these things. The focus is not on enforcement or penalty. It's on cooperating to achieve a stronger supply chain, a more secure supply chain, and reducing risk. The ways that they achieve that security through cooperation are through things like prevention, identifying those security issues that might compromise the integrity of the supply chain early and often, develop the safeguards to minimize those risks, create a program of shared responsibility, relying on the trade community to have a broad and more comprehensive reach because they are the ones that are interfacing with the suppliers and the carriers and the forwarders and the brokers and the entire supply chain. Really, the people that are doing the importing and exporting have that leverage where CBP often does not have that direct line of communication, direct line of contact, and doesn't really have as many levers to pull to influence their security practices when they're in foreign countries. Security awareness is another key component. Having the trade community protect their own supply chains strengthens both the business itself as well as the international supply chain overall. And developing efficiencies by focusing manpower on the higher risk, more problematic concerns and trying to meet the scale and demand of the international trade activity that's going on. In order to do that, those companies that are participating have to be involved. And so CTPAT was born under this mentality and under this mantra. And CTPAT is eligible for several different member types. They're kind of grouped into three different categories. Industry, which are your importers, your exporters, and your foreign manufacturers being limited to just Canada and Mexico. And the industry participants represent about 53% of all CTPAT members. And then you have the transportation component. And here's where your highway, sea, rail, and air carriers are, as well as your Mexican long-haul carriers. That's about 30% of all CTPAT members are in the transportation category. And then lastly, the services segment, which is customs brokers, consolidators, 3PLs, and port authorities and terminal operators. They're about 16% overall. When first applying to CTPAT, or whether you're trying to maintain your membership, recognizing where you fit in the program is essential to understanding what requirements you need to follow and how you are going to implement the program at your business. So you have to recognize what type of business you are and how the eligibility requirements apply to your business. And that's really the first step is taking a look at your business type and the eligibility requirements for the business type to assess whether or not you're in basic compliance with the concept of eligibility for CTPAT, let alone whether your practices are up to snuff, just whether you're eligible to be in the program in the first place. CTPAT also participates in mutual recognition arrangements. Mutual recognition allows for stronger end-to-end supply chain security. It allows enforcement agencies to focus on higher risk cargo that moves across borders. And that's one of the key strategic benefits of CTPAT is that there is a presumption of certain security measures that are in place for CTPAT members that are not in place for non-CTPAT members. And that results in different impacts from different federal agencies as they have responsibility for cargo moving through their borders. And mutual recognition is a way for U.S. Customs to have an established protocol that is agreed upon between our government and a foreign government to ensure that security practices are meeting the same standards, the same degree of standards. And currently, I believe there are 14 or 15 different mutual recognition arrangements in place, and they require that there is a fully operational program in place at a federal level, not just at a business level or an industry level, but at the federal regime level. There has to be a strong validation process in place. In the US, our validation process involves on-site and remote validations where they actually tour your facility, review your documentation, look at the evidence of your implementation. The program has to have a strong security component, and there has to be an established customs mutual assistance agreement already in place with the US Customs. The most recent additions to the mutual recognition arrangements were the UK in 2021. That was bridging a gap due to Brexit. The EU has been an MRA since 2012, and now the UK is as well. And then India in, I believe, September of last year are also eligible. BASC was added in 2020. BASC is the Business Alliance for Secure Commerce, and it has 11 member countries in it, including Argentina, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, the US, Guatemala, Mexico, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Dominican Republic, Uruguay, and Venezuela. Those are all part of the BASC countries, and they are also part of a mutual recognition arrangement with the US. If you have more questions on which countries are eligible or what that mutual recognition arrangement means for your business partners, feel free to follow up with us or ask a question in the webinar. So the program benefits, the mantra behind CTPAT, the reason why they want the carrot to the program itself that helps people recognize how it can be beneficial for them are kind of outlined in some of the CTPAT publications. They're recaptured here. Primarily, one of the biggest benefits is the reduced number of CTP examinations. And in the Trade and Travel Fiscal Report that I referenced earlier on in the webinar, CTP does publish a figure for how much money is saved for CTPAT members. And I don't have a good way to quantify that number or really tie it to anything, but in practice, because your cargo is being screened less often, and because those screenings are very costly, and we are seeing an increase in screenings right now with cargo that's moving across the border, you are potentially, as a CTPAT member, you're potentially saving a significant amount of time and money from not having your cargo screened as often as it would be otherwise. When there is an inspection, you often move to the front of the line if you're a CTPAT member, because there is a presumption of certain practices in place. And that can also minimize the cost and the time investment required for dealing with any sort of inspection requirements. You can be exempted from stratified exams, which are statistical analysis, basically random sampling. There is the possible exemption from those exams entirely. You get assigned a supply chain security specialist, and this benefit in particular can't be understated. Having access to an actual human in CBP for when something goes wrong with your imports or with your exports, and having that conduit to a direct person that understands your business and has connections within the agency itself can really help resolve very, very complex situations quite quickly. And we have made use of that for our clients many times in the past, getting traction with resolving border-related customs holds where no other avenues were useful. The supply chain security specialist with CBP, the CTPAT program, has come in and really helped move things along in ways that nothing else had worked at that point. And there are several other benefits here. I'm not going to read every single one of them, but it is important to recognize that the program does establish you as a partner with CBP and raises your overall profile and the score that CBP assigns you on your imports to help minimize the amount of disruptions that you have at the border. And that's really the largest benefit that comes directly from the program. There are additional benefits that come with joining the program that CBP doesn't promote, but are instead kind of buried in the implications of what CTPAT is and what it means for your business as a whole. Brand protection in particular, because you have certain supply chain security practices in place, if there is some sort of an event, you can often trace back exactly where the problem occurred and ensure that it was not part of your organization. It was you have the evidence to demonstrate that your brand is not what's in jeopardy here. It's a different element of the supply chain that helped cause this breach. It gives you a competitive advantage. Many businesses are only willing to do business with other CTPAT members or other supply chain security program members that are mutually recognized. And if a company is deciding on whether to do business with you or a competitor and you're CTPAT certified and they're not, they are more likely to go with the more secure option. CTPAT initiatives do boost supply chain effectiveness. This is actually probably the biggest benefit that I see on a day-to-day basis. When the organization is more aware of what is supposed to be happening with the shipments, which CTPAT does as an element of its training programs and its development of policies and procedures, it helps your entire supply chain, not just the people working for you, but your suppliers and your forwarders and your broker partners that are part of your supply chain are all of a sudden more informed and more aware of what they're supposed to do, what you expect them to do, and therefore they'll do it just by having that facet of communication and awareness. And there are other strategic benefits that tie in with things like corporate social responsibility, the Uyghur forced labor provisions, and the forced labor acts that have recently passed Congress, and the initiative the CBP is placing on that forced labor mentality. CTPAT has those components built into it, and they often tie in with an existing corporate social responsibility program. Loss prevention and risk management are other key components, parts of businesses that often already exist. CTPAT is going to strengthen those or make those areas easier to manage their aspects to minimize loss prevention and to minimize the risk in the international supply chain. And it boosts overall supply chain security. It's important to note that there is no regulatory basis for CTPAT, so there is no penalty for noncompliance. Usually when we talk about government programs, we're talking about it being a regulatory imperative and there being a penalty for noncompliance. The only penalty for noncompliance in CTPAT is removal from the program. CTPAT is a prerequisite for things like the CTPAT Trusted Trader Program, trade compliance initiative that is evolved from the Importer Self-Audit ISA program that used to exist. And those things have their own penalties for noncompliance, but for CTPAT, it is a voluntary program. So I talked a minute ago about the eligibility requirements, and on the left-hand side here are the importer eligibility requirements. I'm not going to go through all the different business types. Again, it's important for you to understand what business type you are and to pay particular attention to the eligibility requirements for your business. But for importers, which are the majority of CTPAT companies, you have to be an active U.S. importer or non-resident Canadian importer, have a U.S. IOR number, have a continuous import bond, have an officer in the company acting as your main CTPAT point of contact, agree to participate in the program with your signature, provide the security profile, and be in good standing with other U.S. regulatory agencies. So the threshold for being an importer eligible for CTPAT is not exceptionally high. Effectively, a willingness and the actual business practices in place that make you an importer are what are going to get you across that eligibility threshold. But that's just the first step. Once you're eligible to join the program, you then have to understand if your business practices adhere to and follow the minimum security criteria, the MSC. And the MSC, which were recently updated in 2020, they were kind of workshopped for a couple of years before that, but rolled out in 2020, are broken out into 3 focus areas and 12 different categories. The focus areas are corporate security, transportation security, and people and physical security. And we'll look at the categories on the next couple slides. So yeah, if you're not sure if CTPAT is right for you, obviously you want to start with the eligibility requirements, and then from there, understand how the minimum security criteria apply to that type of business and what sort of requirements are going to have to be in place. There is also a cost consideration when thinking about CTPAT, and our teams can help you kind of do that cost benefit analysis and make sure that CTPAT is actually a good choice if you're not in the program already. If you already are in the program, understanding what the expectations are of you, or what the ramifications are for the rest of your business, if you need to explore those, we're more than happy to help. So the corporate criteria, which is the first category, is comprised of these 4 focus areas. First one is security, vision, and responsibility, ensuring that upper management all the way through to all levels of the organization have an understanding and awareness of the concept of security and the role CTPAT plays in the organization. You must have an established risk assessment process to ensure that you are actually evaluating your supply chain, and you are targeting your risk assessment based on various risk and threat factors. You need to roll in things like the different business models that might exist in your company or with your business partners, geographic locations of your suppliers, the types of volumes and the value of their shipments, and yada, yada. But risk assessment is a very important component that a lot of members, particularly newer members, often overlook the importance of having that analysis of their entire supply chain. Business partners are another key focus. One of the foundational tenets of CTPAT is that cooperation aspect, and they are expecting them, the members of CTPAT to work with their business partners in the supply chain, conduct evaluations, ensure that they are meeting minimum security criteria and minimum security requirements, and that they are adhering to the expectations of the program, as well as other business initiatives that might be unique to your business. And then cybersecurity is the 4th and final component of the corporate criteria. This has only become more important over the years, and in the 2020 revamp of the MSC, the cybersecurity aspects were bolstered to focus on a lot of different types of intrusion that might exist in the cybersecurity arena. So it's important to, if you have been in the program for a while and you haven't paid too close attention to the MSC evolution, make sure that you're zeroing in on the cybersecurity component, because it has been extended from where it was. Transportation security is the second of the 3 categories, and it also has 4 focus areas within it. Transportation security, as it might sound, is focused on things like conveyance and instruments of international traffic, IIT security, not IT, not information technology, instruments of international traffic. And they refer to it as IIT in CTPAT. So it's important to be aware of that distinction here. But making sure that you have the right practices in place to secure the modes of transport that are in use throughout your supply chain. Ensuring that you have proper seal control, high security seals, and you're using the correct high security seals that meet the PAS ISO 17712 standard, that you're documenting how those seals are applied and when they're broken and those sorts of things. That you have proper procedures in place to ensure that all of your import-export process is documented, that your storage and handling requirements are met, that you have ways to notify law enforcement when there is a breach, and you have that all documented and available for review. And then lastly, agricultural security, which is also strengthened in the 2020 revamp, where CBP has put quite a fine point on recognizing the possibility of intrusion from invasive species, whether they are animal or plant-based contaminants, bugs, things like that. So making sure that you have proper protocols in place to verify the agricultural integrity to protect the environments, as we are seeing erosion of different species and different ecosystems from the introduction of foreign animals and plants to areas where they're not usually supposed to be. In Ohio in particular, we have a very bad emerald ash borer problem. Lake Erie has some invasive species that were brought in from containers. So there's key factors there. Okay, and the third and final category is the people and physical security. And this is really talking about your physical security, which is your cargo handling, your storage facilities, whether or not they are maintained and built up to a standard to resist intrusion. No holes in the wall as a starter. Do you have fences? And if you do, are they maintained? Paying attention to those sorts of physical factors. Then there's also the physical access controls, which are things like ensuring that there are checkpoints for visitors, or ensuring that you have positive identification for your employees and service providers. and that you don't have just open points of entry that people can walk into your premises to get access to your international cargo areas. Personnel security deals a lot with the human resources requirements, ties in with things like due diligence on employee background screenings, ensuring that employees in sensitive areas are evaluated for any potential risk factors, making sure that your personnel are aware of the CTPAT programs, and it actually ties in with the education awareness, the final component here. And this session that I'm discussing today is one of the good starting points for building out an education awareness program for your own internal staff to make sure that they are aware of what their expectations are, and that there is that culture of compliance and security pervasive throughout your entire organization, as well as informing your supply chain partners, your brokers and your forwarders of your participation in the CTPAT program and what it means, what they need to do in order to help you maintain your compliance. So hopefully those concepts of what drives the CTPAT program forward are clear. There are eligibility requirements, there are minimum security criteria that have to be maintained, and CTPAT is about ensuring you are minimizing the degree of risk through cooperation with customs and other agencies. Security requires active participation and involvement of the entire supply chain, foreign and domestic. Security is now a baseline expectation in global trade. Those of you that are paying attention to things like invoices from your carriers and your freight forwarders will see things like security fees added on there because the entire supply chain, international supply chain, is strengthening its focus and its development of security procedures. And they're passing that costs along to importers and exporters directly in most cases. And companies that are looking to expand and succeed in the global market definitely need to be prepared to adapt to these requirements. Supply chain security has never been more important than it is today, and it will become only more important moving forward. Okay, so now we're going to talk about implementation in your organization, and I'm going to try and talk to it in a general sense for those of you that are currently members and to those of you that are not yet members but are looking at applying to CTPAT. The requirements aren't fundamentally different, but they do have a different tack and different approach to solving those sorts of challenges that might exist. But we'll take a look at what certification requires, what the risk assessment process entails, some of the concepts around supply chain partners, the validation concerns, and then we'll talk about best practices. I know several of you have asked about best practices prior to the webinar, and we'll tackle that a bit. Okay, so first up is certification. And whether you are first time joining CTPAT or even for those of you that have been in the program that maybe weren't around for when the certification steps were taken, it's important to recognize what went into that certification and that initial getting across that first threshold of joining the program and becoming a Tier 1 CTPAT certified business partner. In Tier 1 in the CTPAT universe, Tier 1 means that you have been accepted into the program. You have passed the initial application process, and Customs has reviewed the documentation and information that you have submitted, and they've accepted you into the program. And then you progress to Tier 2 once Customs has conducted their first validation on your business. And then Tier 3 is for those businesses that have implemented best practices, and those best practices are recognized by CBP. So certification, phase one of that is internal commitment. You need to verify that your business type and eligibility requirements are met, review the minimum security criteria, and have an understanding of how they are going to play within your organization. The MSC are not necessarily one size fits all. They are not prescriptive, but they are guidelines for how you need to understand and interpret what CTPAT is looking for so that you can develop a plan of your own that fits with your business. CTPAT does not try to tell you how to do everything. They give you the frameworks that they expect you to operate within. You need to establish cross-departmental commitments. In most of our clients, we recommend establishing something like a security council or a group of key stakeholders in the organization, usually at higher levels of the organization, that are invested, and they represent different areas of the business. Things like HR and IT have a voice in those security councils, and they work together to implement a business-wide approach to security. And create your teams and identify the requirements and internal action plans that need to be followed, and then execute on those plans. That's your commitment stage. Phase 2 is certification. You initiate your supply chain risk assessment and you evaluate the findings from that assessment. Then you apply to the CTPAT program. This will help you complete your supply chain security profile within the CTPAT web portal. And then it's up to CBP to review your application and respond with any follow-up questions or additional requirements or additional documentation that they would like to see. And then within 1 year of that certification, once CBP has approved your application, so at the approval stage is Tier 1 CTPAT member. Then within 1 year of that, you will be validated by CTPAT. They will either select a domestic or a foreign supplier or both, and conduct a review, validation of the security practices that you claimed during the application process. The location selection is determined primarily by your business practices. When they're looking at foreign suppliers, they are typically targeting the highest in either volume or value by region, and they will select a supplier. And when looking at domestic facilities, they will look at the ones that are actually physically receiving the cargo more often than things like business offices or sales offices, typically. Caveats there. But they will conduct the validation, and since COVID in 2020, validations are most often being conducted virtually. There are some different practices that you have to have in place to accommodate the virtual validation process, but by and large, we found it to be much less challenging for most clients to perform a virtual validation than to accommodate 1 or 2 CBP agents actually physically visiting the facility and having to give them the full walking tour and dedicate resources to making sure that happens. That usually takes the better part of a day to make that happen. With virtual validations, they tend to be much quicker, depending on the complexity of the business, and they can often be accomplished in under 3 hours. So rough timelines, the internal commitment phase usually takes about 60 days in our experience, and this is not prescribed necessarily by CTPAT. This is just our experience. We see that getting through that first leg of understanding where you are in this process takes about 60 days. Certification usually takes about 30 days to compile all the information, and about 60 days for CBP to respond and for you to respond to their additional requests. And then validation happens within usually 1 year of certification, plus or minus 90 days for the report to come back. There are additional links down here on other guidance, how to apply for the program, CTPAT validation process. When you receive the slides following the webinar, you'll be able to click these links, and you can check those out for yourself, as well as a link to some of the services that we offer that are kind of mix and match depending on what your business needs are. And I want to spend a minute talking about the global risk assessment and the importance of this. And one of the things that is most often overlooked, or at least underrepresented in many companies' attempts to join CTPAT, or in order to maintain their membership in CTPAT, we often see people that are I don't want to say reprimanded, but they are dinged for not having adequate global risk assessment process in place. And on its face, global risk assessment wants you to map your cargo flow, assess the threats that exist in your supply chain, assess the vulnerabilities that exist in your supply chain, develop an action plan to address those assessments, those threat and vulnerability assessments, and then have an audit plan to evaluate whether the actions taken were successful. And a lot of companies don't understand the complexities involved in this and treat this as a 5-point step, not a big deal. But in reality, CTP wants to see that you have taken into consideration things like geographic risk. If you are shipping from somewhere in Southeast Asia and the cargo routes through the Middle East, what impact does that have on your supply chain? And if you're not aware of where your cargo is routing through, then how can you adequately assess the risk in your global supply chain? And they expect you to have had conversations with your suppliers, with the carriers that they use or that you're using, with the brokers that are handling the documents, and have a good working relationship established with all these partners, so that you can better recognize and they can better recognize when any deviation from the expectation, any deviation from the norm happens that could put your supply chain at risk. And most often, companies don't go far enough when it comes to the global risk assessment. STAR's Global Risk Assessment Program has been given best practice by the CTP specialists during CTPAT validations for our clients. So we put a lot of effort in ensuring that we understand and can represent the supply chain to the officers, and they tend to respond in kind with appreciation of the fact that that attention is being paid, and they don't need to go do the digging. They've got the information available to them to immediately recognize if the global risk assessment is up to snuff. Your supply chain partners, and I've said it several times, I'll say it again, are essential to your supply chain security program. When it comes to the business partner requirements in the corporate security vision and responsibility section of the minimum security criteria, business partners and supply chain partners are an integral component of ensuring you have supply chain security in place throughout your international supply chain. It's not enough that your internal teams are following all the right rules and procedures. You have to have the buy-in and participation from your supply chain. And typically this manifests through things like assessments. Have you asked them a series of questions that detail their internal supply, security practices? Have you evaluated what they've said and understood what they're saying and how it impacts your global risk? Do you have the evidence and supporting documentation that you need in order to demonstrate that to the CTPAT supply chain specialists? Your contracts are another key piece of your supply chain partner security concepts. Does your contract have language, whether for foreign and domestic trading, that refers to baseline security requirements? Does it call out CTPAT directly in the contract as a standard that you're trying to meet? Do you have provisions in there that allow you to terminate the sale because certain security practices are not met? These sorts of levers, this leverage, gives businesses much better ability to control what sort of security practices are in place, which is extremely important when it comes to trying to strengthen the supply chain from end to end. And lastly, do you understand what your partner supply chain security practices are when it comes to things like high security seals and how they do container inspections? Do you get copies of their inspection checklists? Can you match the high security seals that they applied at the point of origin to the seal number that you received at the final destination? And what do you do if there's a difference and a discrepancy? CBP will often break those seals, and you should be able to recognize that there was a change in seal number when they apply a new seal that's different from the one they broke, and you don't catch it. That's one of the ways that specialists will recognize that you're not paying close enough attention to what's going on in your supply chain. And you have good practices for good procedures in place for your how to deal with your business partners and how to handle visitations, either from your own supply chain security evaluation teams or from Q&A, or even from CBP themselves during a validation visit. And best practices here. Tier 3, like I mentioned before, Tier 3 is reserved for, I think, less than 1% of all CTPAT members. Is for the best practices, those companies that have established that they are meeting the highest standards within the CTPAT program. The minimum criteria to be eligible for the best practices tier is that you have to have very clear and demonstrated senior management support and investment. It can't just be cursory. We have something on our website or our CEO signed this piece of paper. They have to be involved in the program directly. There has to be evidence of implementation within CTPAT throughout your organization. They're going to look for different indicators that demonstrate that you are paying attention, things like training and awareness, things like HR policies and procedures, and things like business partner processes that are in place and that are verifiable. Your practices towards supply chain security need to be innovative. They can't just be standard expected. We put seals on and we check the numbers. That's expected. In order to be innovative, back in the day, they used to accept things like taking pictures of the loaded containers before the doors were shut and before the seal was applied, taking pictures of the seal. Those were the standards of innovative and have since become the standard for now the innovative best practice standard has evolved to now become the standard practice and the expected. And if you don't have things like pictures, you could be actually behind your peers. So they're looking for something that's innovative, not just something that was good 5 years ago. They're looking for something that's good today. Documented process, systems of checks and balances, and accountability need to be in place throughout the organization. And additionally, you must meet all of the minimum security criteria. That's a given. You must be able to complete a validation and have no actions required. When CBP conducts a validation, they give you one of three different types of feedback. The standard one is they accept, actually there's 4 types. We'll go with 4. The standard one is you have practices in place and we verify that you do have those practices and everything's good there. The second type is a recommendation. This is where they say, hey, this practice you have in place is a little bit not quite geared towards what it needs to be geared towards, and we recommend that you pay attention to these other factors. And those are okay as well during the validations. And the third type is going to be a required action. And required actions mean that you are actually deficient in a particular area, and they require you to remediate or to deal with that deficiency in some way or other. They'll provide you guidance on how to address that action, and you have time to respond to that, usually 30 to 60 days at least. And if you need more time, you can ask for it, and then you provide them evidence of that change being implemented, and things are fine. And then the fourth type of feedback that they give you is best practices. So in best practices, you have to demonstrate at least one best practice during the validation to be eligible to even be considered for the Tier 3 best practices framework. And they did publish this best practices framework, I believe, in 2021, last year, to help CTPAT companies understand where their targets might lie for consideration for Tier 3. And lastly, if you need more help with CTPAT, our team is phenomenal. Our secureglobaltrade.com website has been created to really help you recognize where value can be brought to your organization, whether it's your first time applying for CTPAT, whether you're Tier 3 and you need to maintain that status, whether you need to get reinstated. We have had clients who have been removed from the program for one reason or another and that need to get back in, and we help them cross those bridges. It's often more challenging than just applying for the first time. Or if you just need help, if you stepped into the program and you're not sure exactly how well it's working, or you need to look at it, please do reach out to us. We have very skilled and experienced teams that know what they're doing. So if you need guidance, we are here, and there are links there that you can click on when you get the slides. There are some additional resources here. We have collected a series of job aids from CBP and other various resources on our website, and then also links directly to CTPAT publications and WCO frameworks that are good places to start learning. Okay, that concludes the presentation portion, and I am going to stop the recording so that we can do Stump the Speaker. Thank you everyone for attending, and here we go.